Hey, shalom, shalom, shalom. Akim and Aqua that happened to see this. This is Naaman from DC Camp, Great Millstone, back for another video. But first and foremost, call hello Yahweh, Ba'Hashem Yahushua, Ba'Hashem Rakah Radash. And of course, once again, double honors go out to the apostles, bishops, and elders of Great Millstone who rule well. Also, send out salutations to the fellow Akim that are out there on the highways and byways, pushing the truth. Ever more so now, alright, across the four corners of this earth, while time yet permits us to do so, because time is indeed growing short. This video here has to do with Mr. Tim Wise. Mr. Wise goes around and telling his fellow Edomites, alright, how they've fucked up, alright. They think they've had it so good, but how did they get to this point? And in this one, he's telling them about the image that they portrayed throughout the centuries, ever since the Renaissance, the false image, I might add, of we know as Yahweh Shai, they call JC, all right, and the damage that has, psychologically, the damage that has done to everybody that is not them. So we're going to go ahead and get on into this. Won't have to have me ramble so much. And let's see what you think.
Sir, there's God right in the clouds, Santa in the sky, white dude, all the biblical characters in the Bible, children's books, white people, even though they were in a part of the world where there are no white people, right? So even though we don't have that in our home, my child has nonetheless already at the age of 7 somehow internalized the...
Which I must say, stop it early here, which really, as he just stated there, really actually has very little to do with all right, who they are. For reference, you understand, or if you understand, Genesis 25th chapter, actually you have to go back to Genesis the 4th chapter to really get that. What was that curse that was put on people that were originally a people of, as they like to say, color? And that curse actually took effect in Genesis 25th chapter, all right? So here you have the progenitor of the so-called white race, which was Esau. All right, let's continue.
Is the idea that the creation source of the universe, whether taken in religious terms or humanistic and more naturalistic terms, is somehow closer to her than to Morgan Freeman. And if my daughter has internalized that, what do you think black and brown children internalize when they see the same imagery? And they see those images. They see them in the stained glass of our churches. You see them in the Christmas cards that get sent around every holiday season where baby Jesus is in the manger in what apparently is Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, rather than the other Bethlehem, right? Lily white Jesus, which makes no sense anthropologically, biologically, historically, makes no sense at all.
Yeah, and to kind of how they react to that, you know, usually the usual way through deflection and trying to rationalize it, they'll say, well, he was Middle Eastern. Oh, and my favorite, he was olive skin. Well, what color are olives? Brown, black, and green, right? I haven't seen any green people. There are really no black people. So it would have to be brown, right?
But our children see those images and it can affect them. Now, if you were to try to break into my house and hurt my children, I would kill you without hesitation. I don't even have a gun, but I would find something and I would throw it at you and you would die. Like, it's just that simple. I would make sure that you died, right? If you were to try to hurt my kids. I'm not saying that because I'm a badass. I'm just saying, like, I'm just letting you know, like, don't mess with my children. But the problem, right, the problem is that there is something coming into that house. And it is hurting my children, and it's hurting all of our children, and it's hurting us, and I didn't even know it was there. See, the doors are locked at night, the windows are shut, the alarm is on, and whatever this thing is doesn't know the code, but the dirty little secret is it doesn't need to. It weasels its way into our children's brains and affects them. That's how I know that we've all ingested this poison, and we better own that if we're going to have an honest dialogue. It's not about feeling guilty about it. In fact, that's the beauty of it, right? If we've all been subjected to it, there's no reason to feel guilty. because we could not have helped but ingest it. The question is, what do we do now? How do we take responsibility?
And that is why I always say, in the form of a question, of course, what is the biggest religion that the earth has ever known? So-called white supremacy. This is why.
Responsibility, which is not the same as guilt. Responsibility is what you take because of the kind of person you are. Guilt is what you feel for the stuff you've actually done. Those are two different things. We take responsibility for things even when we're not to blame for them. So that's the first piece. The second piece, the systemic piece, right? Our inability or our lack of willingness to admit that there's also a systemic element to racism, that it's not just about personal prejudice. If it were, it'd be so much easier, right? Because we could just educate people out of their biases, right? And we could somehow undo their personal stuff and everything would be fine. But there's a bigger problem, and it's systemic. It's the way that policies and practices and everyday procedures reinforce inequality between different racial groups, even if there's no overt bigotry in the room. What do I mean by that? Let me tell you a story to make.
Translation, it was deliberate. It always has been. I'm starting to sound like, well, never mind.
At that point, and it's a story about my own life. I am from the South. I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee. I've lived in the South all my life, 10 years in New Orleans, the rest of it in Nashville. 5 months in Houston, but we don't talk about that. No offense to Houston, I'm just saying, like there are reasons and we will not discuss them. So growing up in Nashville, I went to school in public schools at a time when they had really just become truly integrated. That may seem sort of hard to believe because theoretically, right, the Supreme Court outlawed segregation back in 1954, but as was the case in Nashville, so too was it the case all throughout the South, that very few school systems actually moved toward real desegregation for about 20 years. So it was 1974, the year that I started first grade, that the school system in Nashville was actually truly integrated all the way down to the first grade level. And so by 1979-80, my fifth grade year, right, there were a lot of teachers in that system that had been in there for a really long time. Like they had been teaching since the days of segregation, and they were the kind of people that really preferred the days of segregation, right? So they didn't like having to teach black kids now, but what they really didn't like was having to teach white kids who hung out with black kids. And that was me. See, I told you before, most of the time when we say we have black friends, we're lying. In my case, I pretty much didn't have anything but black friends for the first several years of school because I went to preschool at a historically black.
It may be that he's not an Edomite. Who's to say? But it's like certain things. He mentioned 54. Well, 3 years later, in 57, my old high school, Little Rock Central, when Governor Faubus and Eisenhower sent in the National Guard because 9 so-called black kids wanted to go to school there, and after that speech that motherfucking Alabama gave, you know, segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation, you know. So, yeah, they got in, but what they don't tell you is for the next year, nobody went. So people had to go out of state or wherever, all right, for that year. Yeah, I mean, the amount of hate. And I remember my older sister, she told me about, did she go to Central, did she go to Hall? But her going to, you know, having been pushed down the steps and shit like that by these motherfuckers. But in any case, yeah, it's like, never trust your enemy. Never. There's a reason that's in there. You know, for all these centuries, let's just call it what it is. All this so-called legislation, so-called laws, it's really not worth the paper that it's written on, because like example I just gave you, they always find a way to get around that shit. When you think about after so-called Emancipation Proclamation, we know that was bullshit. But the 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, 15th Amendments were exclusively for our people. All right. Now they like to use that, especially the 14th Amendment, for these immigrants and others. You might say, well, what others are there? I'm talking about the Skittles Nation. I mean, all this is being used against us. And now, whenever situations come up about the past, they're quick to spin it and lie about it in order to suit their own needs. And what I mean by that is currently this DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, critical race theory, as they call it, that's something they jumped on quick because, in other words, they just try to flip it. And they're more or less tired of Jake. And someone made a point, an excellent point, because the one thing they can't do, is what they really want to, is get rid of Jake like they do all the immigrants. How are they going to deport us? Where are they going to deport us to? So you have this glaring example of the worst fuck up you ever made that you just can't get rid of. You have to see them every day. You have to work with them. There's constant reminders about what you did. So in order to deflect, every now and then you'll hear about the Hollow hoax, which was intentionally done, I might add, for that sole reason. Because they never, and even to this day, fit, the curses, the conditions that were laid out as to identify who the actual Israelites are. They never did. And even in that is so poor of an example, but people get so emotional they don't take the time to say, well, wait a minute. Something don't add up here. Now they're doing it because people are tired, and it's largely their own fault because they kept going to that cookie jar, and that cookie jar represents playing on people's emotions. Oh, please feel sorry for me. It's all because of, what happened in World War II. You have to forgive us. No, people are looking, enough is enough. Especially over here, that happened over there. Why do we constantly have to fucking keep hearing about that shit? Let's see. Again, goes back to what I just said earlier. They have to look at it. It's like at the end of those, Scooby-Doo cartoons, where the villain always says, if it wasn't for you meddling kids, I would have got away. Well, we represent those meddling kids. All right, it's always that constant reminder. What was that song? There's always something there to remind me, and we're constantly in their face. Oh, what they would like to do. But that's all in the scriptures. Again, that's prophecy, which them folks do not fit.
Black college when I was 3 years old. Tennessee State University early childhood ed program. So most of my peers were black kids. So when I got into public school, that's who I was hanging out with. That's who I played ball with. That's who I played on the playground with. That's who I sat in the cafeteria with. And there were teachers who not only didn't like the black kids, but really didn't like me, particularly because of my affinities, both culturally, linguistically, and artistically with black folks. These are the early days of hip hop, and I was that kid. Like, I was the white kid that hung out with. We would have like rap battles, and I'm not going to do that shit now because it would be tragic. But in those days, like 79, 80, you could be really bad at that in Nashville, and you were still the best on the block, right? Because
Jake, through the spirit, vibes with Jake, all right? Unless he's a very cunning Amalekite, because those are the only ones, and they do it for nefarious reasons, of course. Hang around and, rub shoulders with Jake in order to, take advantage in some way.
It was Nashville, it wasn't Brooklyn, it wasn't the Bronx, right? So the teachers really had a problem with who I hung out with and the music that I listened to and who my friends were. And there was one particular teacher Mrs. Crownover, who was most offended by it. And so one day I get a report card. I have a D- in a reading class, which was what she taught, right? And my mom freaked out because reading was like the one thing I could do, right? If it was a math class, she would have totally not even blinked. She'd have been like, well, at least you didn't fail, you know? Good for you. You got it up from the F last time, you know? But in this particular case, I've been reading since I was like 2.5, right? So she sort of freaks out. She schedules a parent-teacher conference. She goes to talk to Ms. Crownover. And within about 30, 45 seconds, she realizes that grade had nothing to do with my actual effort, let alone my attitude, let alone my ability to read. It had to do with my social circle, because Ms. Crownover looks at my mom within the first minute of the meeting and says, any white parent that would send their kids to public school in this day and age, meaning an integrated day and age, obviously isn't fit to be a parent. They've lost their mind. This, by the way, is not what you want to say to my mother. So within a day or two, she organized with some other parents, and within 2 or 3 or 4 days, she had very directly and unceremoniously made sure that Mrs. Crownover was relieved of her income and her professional duties from there on out. She was forced into early retirement, as she should have been. So good for my mom. On the one hand, that's great. We got rid of the bigot. But remember, I told you it wasn't about individual bigots. It was about systems. And so here's the problem. Even as my mother took action, as she should have, to remove this racist from the classroom where she had no business teaching, right? But the problem was that after Ms. Crownover was gone, I went back into a school system that every day, in a very subtle but pernicious way, was sending the same kind of message that Mrs. Crownover was trying to send, which is white students are better, black students are lesser, and they shouldn't be together. How was the system sending that message? Very easy. By putting almost all the white kids in the honors and the advanced level classes, no matter what kind of students we were. I was a lousy student. I wasn't a good student till like last week. I literally got my shit together like Tuesday of last week, right? I wasn't a good student, but I was always in the honors track. And the black kids, no matter how bright they were almost always in the standard or the remedial level track and never moved up no matter how well they did. So the system was sending a message by dividing us and saying that it was division based on ability, but it wasn't. They were sending the message that Crownover was sending. They didn't even need her there to send it, you see, and my mother never saw that. And I never saw that. It went right over our heads. And that's not just a 1979 story. That continues to happen today. Right now in this country, students of color are half as likely to be placed in advanced placement and honors classes compared to white students. Students of color are half as likely to be taught by the most experienced teachers. White students twice as likely to have the most experienced teachers, right? Black and Latino students 2, 3, even 4 times more.
And for those who, for some reason, still like to deny these things, he's going into systemic racism. All right, it's, what's the other word? It's built within. That's another word I'm looking for. It's damn it. This whole thing is. Damn it! I wish I could remember that word. In other words, it's built into this. You'll never get rid of it. That's why this place has to go. But other thing I want to address, because he used the example of his teaching, and I thought about, well, after the Civil War, and then you had this group called the Daughters of, oh man, what was it? Not the American Revolution. Was it Daughters of the Confederacy? My point being that, yes, they lost the South, being they lost the Civil War, but I've always said, well, they won everything else, because you got people like her that were teachers, and they taught this, what is it called? It's revisionist history, but it's a name for it. To have sympathy for the South and its take on things. I can't remember hopefully I'll relate it. But if you went to schools in the South, that was the thing. And they were the ones that I don't want to, well, invent might be too strong a word, but they were the ones that were responsible, I'll put it that way, for that. I think it's the daughters of the. Anyway, so yeah, that was it. To have sympathy for the cause, for the Southern plight, as it were. That's what I'm trying to say.
More likely to be suspended or expelled, even though they do not break the rules more often than white students. That's the belief, but it's not true. There have been 14 different studies. They all find the same thing, that the rates of serious school rule infractions are virtually identical across racial lines. People bringing drugs to campus, equally across racial lines. People bringing weapons to campus, actually white men more likely to bring guns and knives to campus in K-12 schools than black men or Latino men. Contrary to popular belief, but that's what the Centers for Disease Control research says. But who is it that's getting caught? It's black kids and Latino kids. They're the ones getting searched. They're the ones getting detected. They're the ones getting suspended and often prosecuted. Whereas white students are doing the same thing, doing drugs just as much, bringing weapons just as often, if not more so, and escaping notice. So that's still happening. That's a system, and it doesn't require one overt racist in the classroom for that to continue, right? So that becomes a problem. We have to do more than just look at the individual. We have to look at the way that structures operate, sometimes without us even realizing it's happening. Because if we don't do that, we can get rid of every individual bigoted cop or every individual bigoted teacher or any individual bigoted employer. We can sue them, I guess, in court, and maybe people can even win those lawsuits, but what does that really change unless we take aim at those institutional policies that keep recreating inequality?
And guess what the instrument that they used, and we always bring this out since the Renaissance, give you an exact year, 1492, when it came to the Western Hemisphere, with what? Christianity. The bloodiest religion. The bloodiest religion. And why? Because of their misuse of Matthew's 10 and 34. First, let's see. Christianity and violence. Christians have had diverse attitudes towards violence and nonviolence over time. And Jake is fucked up. They took our book, rebranded it, sold it back to us, so to speak. And Jake that's what he's really actually, what he started out going into. I'm just now going into that part of it. But this has been responsible for so much misery. Remember, Revelation 20th chapter. How did he deceive the people? Well, you're looking at it. Psalms 50 verses 16 and 17. They took what was not theirs, took it within themselves, spun it around to suit their cause. But in fact, let's go to that, because since they did that, this is Psalms 50. Go straight to it. It says, but unto the wicked, who they are, remember, they are the Edomites, descendants of Jacob's brother Esau. All right, they are the wicked. Malachi 1, verses 1 through 4. The point is in 4. All right, and, the Most High hates them, and they cannot repent. That's Hebrews 12, verses 16 and 17. All right, so, they're dead end. They are actually a dead end race. The Zondervan Bible Dictionary tells you what's going to happen to the Edomites. Of all the neighbors of Israel, they're the only one that will not receive any mercy from the Most High. So how are you out there? I'm talking about you Jakes out there campaigning for these Edomites. Who are you? Also, it says that the Most High made crooked cannot be made straight. I'll come back to this. Let's get that real quick. All right. It's in a couple of places here. Let's see. It says that which is crooked cannot be made straight, and that which is wanting cannot be numbered. Let's in the same book. Let's go to chapter 7, I believe it's around 20. Hold on, or is that something else? Let's see. No, I went too far. Here it is, verse 13. Consider the work of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushua, for who can make that straight which he hath made crooked? So it's an exercise in futility. That's the point I'm trying to make. So it's like, who are you? And it's because what we're just going into here about Christianity, that bloody, because it's a bloody man that is taking that up. Now let's go back to Psalms 50. All right. It says, but unto the wicked the Most High saith, what hast thou to do to declare my statutes? Or that thou shouldest take my covenant in thy mouth? Has nothing to do with you. Seeing thou hatest instruction, which they do, because they turn everything upside down, all right, and castest my words behind thee. Example of that is the court system. They make you, which you shouldn't do, by the way, swearing on the scriptures, which they have nothing to do with, and then put it away and bring out their shit. All right. So, yeah, this, there's no, he's going down and there's no saving him. That's my point. All right, but you can read this if you want. I'll put this in the link. Of course, they're going to bring up all their people that they say were their people. And this is the concept of just war. The belief that limited uses of war were acceptable, originating in the writings of earlier non-Christian Roman and Greek thinkers such as Cicero and Plato. All right, later this theory was adopted by Christian thinkers such as St. Augustine, all right, who, like other Christians, borrowed much of the just war concept from Roman law and the works of Roman writers like Cicero. Roman law, well, that's Edomites, all right, such as holy war, whereby fighting itself might be considered a penitential and spiritually meritorious act. All right, did not emerge before the 11th century. You got to remember, did not Yahushua say that if this were his kingdom, all right, his servants would fight, meaning this is not his kingdom? Duh. And there's other scriptures, all right? He's coming back. In fact, let's get 1 Corinthians. Let's see. 15 and 23. Then cometh the end, when he shall have delivered up the kingdom to Yahushua, even the Father, and when he shall have put down all rule and all authority and power. Which makes you what? Leads you to believe this is not the kingdom of heaven. So who are those people over there in the Holy Land? Let's take it one step further. Aha! That prophecy hasn't been fulfilled yet. The 48ers. They're frauds. Read Ezekiel 36th chapter. Actually, read 35 and 36. They're frauds. Zechariah 9 and 6. They're frauds. Romans answers so many questions. 13 tells you the Most High hates Edomites. For you Christians that say, oh, no, you're never thinking that was something that they would use, a ruse against you. God doesn't hate. And yet we're the most hated people. Wow. They really pulled a mind fuck on our people using our book. All right, let's see how much left. Let's continue.
The third piece, our unwillingness to see how history affects the present, how the past and the present mix. We really don't like this. We really don't want to talk about this. And when I say we, I mean those of us called white especially. There are people of color who don't necessarily always want to engage it either, but especially those of us called white. We'll say things like this when people of color bring up racism. We'll say, well, why can't you just get over it? You know, all of that slavery stuff was a long time.
And what is that known as? Sometimes I'll bring this up. Let's go back to, let's see, let's see, dang it. I didn't draw a blank. Gaslighting, racial gaslighting. Racial gaslighting downplays what he's getting ready to tell you, or denies the racism experienced by people of color. Of course, if you do it to a certain group of people, they call you an anti-what? Anti-Sem, right? The word doesn't even exist. All right, but this type of manipulation, and that's what it is, can reinforce systemic racism by leading you to question your thoughts, feelings, and experiences.
Long time ago. In fact, Louis C.K. has this really funny bit, right, where he jokes about how white people have just moved the date of slavery further and further and further back. Like it used to be, slavery was 100 years ago, because it was, and then it was, slavery was 125 years ago, because it was, and now it should be, slavery was 150 years ago, but we'll actually say things like, that was hundreds and hundreds, that was like 1,000 years ago, where we've had slavery for 500 years. When in fact it's very much within the lifetime of people in this room's great-great-grandparents, even sometimes great-grandparents. And in fact, de facto slavery extended well past the Emancipation Proclamation. There were people of color being sent back into virtual enslavement all throughout the first 30 years of the 20th century, being made to work in the mines in places like Birmingham, coal mines there and elsewhere, going back to the very plantations from which their grandparents and great-grandparents had been emancipated as sharecroppers, as tenant labor, tenant farmers, right? So in fact, slavery isn't that long ago. Segregation certainly isn't that long ago. But here's the point. We don't want to talk about it, and this is really funny that we want to tell black and brown folks to get over the past, because frankly, those of us who are white, we love the past. Absolutely flippin' love the past. How do I know that? Because some of us clearly want to go back to it.
There you go.
How do I know that? Because the Tea Party was a thing. And during that period when the Tea Party was a thing, you had a bunch of white folks going to rallies dressed in Revolutionary War costumes, carrying muskets and wearing powdered wigs. Okay, here's the thing. If you dress up in a Revolutionary War costume with a musket and a powdered wig, calling yourself the Tea Party, which I think is a really old-ass reference, you were in no position to lecture black people about getting over the past. That's all. Right? Because by definition, you're still rocking like 1774. You got me? Right? But even now, right, we say things like, what is July 4th other than a reference to the past? Like, why do we still celebrate that? Independence Day. We broke away from the...
All the more reason to ask the question, what the fuck are you jakes out there celebrating July the 4th for? What condition were your people in July the 4th, 1770? Man, get the fuck out of here.
From the British a long-ass time ago. That didn't happen last Friday. So why do we still set off fireworks every July 4th, right? I dare you to go up next Independence Day to like the most patriotic guy on the route, you know, with the red, white, and blue wardrobe, because that's an awesome wardrobe palette. And like a big I Heart the USA button on his hat, like flying a flag, blaring Lee Greenwood from the back of a pickup truck. I dare you to go up to that guy, tap him on the shoulder and say, yeah, this is all really nice, this is great, but when are you gonna get over it? Hope you have running shoes on, because he's gonna chase you. Although he'll probably have had enough, you know, slices of mom's apple pie that he won't be able to catch you. But my point being, we love the past as long as it makes us feel good about ourselves, right? When a current presidential candidate says he wants to make America great again, it's a reference to the past, right? It's a reference that says we want to go back to when things were great. but only great for certain people because the time that's being remembered so fondly wasn't so great for everyone, right? So we love the past as long as it venerates us. We just don't want to deal with the ugly, but that's not how history works. You got to deal with the good and the bad and everything in between, right? And we know that, don't we? Like on a personal level, we know, like, put aside politics and race, just like you as individuals, right? We all come from families that are jacked up in one way or another, right? We all have dysfunction. We all have really messed up stuff in our families, some of which we talk about, a lot of which we never talk about, right? And the fact is, if you ever want, just as an individual, to move past your past, you have to confront it. Whether that's on a therapist couch or whether that's with friends or a lover or a spouse or a partner, whatever it is, you've got to be willing to confront where you come from in order to get to the next place that's better. But we don't want to do that. We don't do that as individuals, and it eats us up. And we don't do that as a country, but we have to do that because the past affects the present. Inertia isn't just a property of the physical universe. It's also a property of the political and the economic universe. And here's how I know it's so important. Again, a story involving my own children about why it's so important that we know our history and are able to articulate that and the dangers of not knowing it. So, as it turns out, our daughters are both dancers, and
that's where it ends. So, I made a comment earlier about the misuse of, and that eventually what, as I go back here, if it'll let me go back, the Christianity and the violence associated with it. It misused, their misuse of, I should say, Matthew 10, and let's get that real quick, and 34, right? And it says, "Think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword." It's not actually talking about a physical sword. All right. Hebrews 4 and 12. All right. Let's see. "For the word of the Most High is quick and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even to the dividing asunder of soul and spirit." And we've seen that many times. "And of the joints and marrow, and is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart." I used the example, all right, when they came for the Lord, and one of the disciples cut off an ear, and Yahushua picked it up and put it back on. And later in that chapter, it tells you that, you know, if this were his kingdom, his servants would fight, letting you know this wasn't his kingdom. And I read you 1 Corinthians 15 and 24. This is not the time. This is not the kingdom of heaven. So no, it was not at that time, and nor now is it talking about an actual sword. That's coming. Trust me, that's coming. And go to Isaiah 47, all right, verse 6, I think it is. Let's see. Hold on. No, it's 3. Talking about this, you know, this system, this kingdom. "Thy nakedness shall be uncovered, yea," and that's happening now. He's being exposed. "Thy shame shall be seen. I will take vengeance, and I will not meet thee as a man." So this is yet to come. But the violent man that these sick bastards are, and I'm talking about so-called white people, they are the nation of Edom. That is their nature. All right? Bloodshed, thievery, robbery. Let's look up a word here I had. Scoundrel. This is what our people, the people that, you know, that they're seeking justice from. An unprincipled, dishonorable person. Villain. And the main ones, by the way, Amalek, they like to play the victim also. Mean or base in nature. Uh-oh. Job goes into that. How base a people these Edomites, these so-called white people are. He didn't even want them around his dogs. Think about that. Villainous. Dishonorable. A wicked or evil person. Someone who does evil deliberately. There's scripture that says they can't rest, all right, unless they've done wickedness. I'm, of course, paraphrasing. A person who for some reason is not wanted or welcome. Someone who is, hold on, morally reprehensible. You dirty dog. A person who deserves to be hanged. Think about Haman. And the same thing is going to happen to them as a whole, because they're going to be rounded up, according to Obadiah, verse 18, and done away with. They're no longer going to be on this earth. A deceitful and unreliable scoundrel. All right. Let's look at the other one. This is from Edom Online. Let's see. Base, mean, worthless fellow. Scroll, skipping on down here. All right. Let's see. Audacious rascal. One destitute of all moral scruple. And that's why, and I'll end it with this, I promise. I always use this scripture here. And this is Psalms 43:1. This is, if it's left up to the 2/3 of our people, we'll be here because they don't get it. It says, "Judge me, O Most High, and plead my cause against an ungodly nation. O deliver me from the deceitful and unjust man." He keeps leading our people on, those that, all right, just refused or just can't get it. All right, that's their lot. All right, that's why you got to separate yourself from people like that. If they don't get it, they can't. As the scriptures say, after 1, 2, or 3 times, and again, I'm paraphrasing, you know, after you've explained things to them, they can't get it, you know. It may be, they may get it sometime down the line, but again, time is short here. You don't have time for that. All right, so with that, once again, this has been Mr. Tim Wise. And it says, a few comments here. He's telling the terrible truth. As a black doctor in the South, the tremendous amount of racism that I have experienced in the world whilst on my journey, the number of professors who didn't want me to succeed, the classmates who didn't want me in their study groups, I will never understand a superiority complex. How? I graduated at the top of my class, and many of them couldn't handle the pressure. See, that goes into what he was saying earlier in the video. They did not like us being together in the classroom. All right. I applaud the audience for attending. It takes an open mind to be willing to be exposed to truth that could challenge everything you thought you knew, and that goes into cognitive dissonance, which a lot of them suffer from. But like I said, I ended on that, so of course I put all this in the description box, the links and everything. With that, it says, if you see the pop up there, it says, "We've lied enough to blacks." You certainly have, and it's all coming back. So with that, until the next video, hey, shalom.